Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Number one, or a very high atop the list, would be your outcomes and results, and the consistency of how you deliver those outcomes and results. It's easy for me to look back along my career path and easily call out, even from the early days of my career, who I have thought as A players.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have the legend that is Ralph Barsi. He is the VP of Global Inside Sales over at Tray.io. And on today's episode, we're getting into a topic which is, well, it's incredibly important right now in this up and down, topsy-turvy, uncertain world that we're living in this uncertain economy that we're living through. We're diving into how you can become an unsackable salesperson. Everything that we talk about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that said, let's jump right into it. And on today's show, we're going to get into a topic that I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm going to pose it to you anyway. And this is what we're going to discuss on today's show. I'm going to ask you how to become unsackable as a salesperson. So the place to start with this, Ralph, is that physically, feasibly possible?
Anything is possible. So it is possible and feasibly possible. I don't know if I have the answer to the question either, Will, but what I can do is just share from my experience, characteristics, attributes, traits that I have noticed over the years of people who I think are indispensable, or as you say, unsackable. That's a great word.
Yeah, I think when we prep the show, you use the word indispensable. And I feel like that is what a manager would describe a salesperson as, but a salesperson being slightly selfish for themselves are probably thinking, right, how can I crush my quota and how can I become unsackable? A business consultant would probably say anti-fragile, or all these fancy ways of describing the same thing. But with that said, Ralph, if it's feasibly possible, we're both positive thinkers here, clearly. If it's feasibly possible, what is, to start the show off with a bang, what's the most important element of becoming unsackable as a sales professional?
Number one, or a very high atop the list, would be your outcomes and results, and the consistency of how you deliver those outcomes and results. It's easy for me to look back along my career path and easily call out, even from the early days of my career, who I have thought as A players. And one thing rings true among all the A players in my list, and that is that they were always consistent with results and outcomes, driving revenue for the organization. If they're an individual contributor, if they're a sales development rep, for example, they were always booking high quality meetings with consistency, and those high quality meetings would become viable sales opportunities for the pipeline. If they were leaders, they were recruiting, hiring, and even retaining the top talent in the marketplace. So those have been some of the patterns I've seen. It's just that those consistent results and outcomes, and there's so much more beneath that, or along with it, that we could talk about.
And let's split these two up, right? And I can give an anecdote why in a second, but which is, if you had to choose one of them, which is more important, consistency or what I used to do was essentially do an okay year, and then every now and again I'd score a massive sale, which would dwarf all the rest of them, and so I'd always hit target. But my sales manager would always be pulling their hair out over the fact that I might be missing it, things might be going back and forth, and I'd always pull it out of the bag, maybe just by fluke and luck at the end of the year. So which is more important from that perspective? Is it just to hit and beat your target, or is consistency, is there more to that?
Wow, such a tough one to answer. It's such a subjective answer required for that question. Personally, I think consistency is key. However, it really depends on the organization and where that organization is in the maturity cycle of a business's growth. So, oftentimes they're at a point in the maturity cycle where it's okay to, land the elephant, so to speak, once a year and bring home that walloping ACV amount against our ARR target. And that suffices. And it's on to the next fiscal year. You know what I mean? But I'm a big fan of consistency. just to mitigate and avoid as much as possible that scenario you just brought up, where you can't sleep, you're losing yourself waiting for the contract to come in. So I like the consistency. It just gives me a sense of calmness.
And it seems so I've never really done sales management, so outside looking in, it seems like if I had someone who is consistent, we could improve them 1%, 2%, 5%, and eventually they would then consistently hit target. Versus I know with me, sales managers would get frustrated because, again, I would hit that 1, 2 big deals a year, and the rest of it, I don't think they thought I was lazy, but they thought that I could be coached, I could be trained, I could be improved. When in reality, I was working on those large deals because that's what excited me. That's what made me interested in kind of business to government sales, but we were selling medical devices here in the NHS in the UK. So I just wanted to get a actual expert's kind of opinion on thoughts on that, because it seems like consistency you can do something with. When someone is just seemingly lucky once a year, but they hit target, that seems like more potentially a bit of a burden as a sales manager.
Sure, it certainly is, and candidly, I haven't led a team of individual contributors in a good 10 years. However, I've led sales development organizations and sales development reps who've become power hitters as individual contributors. So I have seen both sides of the fence, and of course served as an individual contributor myself. But I think what you said, Will, is a really nice segue into other attributes that we could talk about, and that is that coachability. They've got to be pliable enough to accept constructive criticism, feedback, and then turn it into better productivity, on a daily basis, which obviously leads into quarterly performance and annual performance. You've just got to be an active listener and open to feedback. And also the A players I've seen in my career, they want to improve. Very rarely have I met an A player sales rep who's kind of, pushed back on any constructive feedback. They've always been open to it. They don't always apply what they're hearing, mind you, but they're always open to hearing it.
Sure. And in turbulent times like we're living through right now with the COVID pandemic and the economy going up and down, and what that actually means for anyone who's in a small to medium business versus the enterprise and all these different variables, Ralph, what should salespeople be doing proactively on that training, learning, and being coachable front? Should they be proactively going to their sales manager and asking for advice and trying to align themselves as different to perhaps some of their other colleagues who were just head down and plodding along? Is the value in proactively going about this as opposed to just receiving coaching when it's given?
Absolutely. And that's another strong trait of these types of salespeople is they are proactive. They do take initiative. They hold themselves accountable for their success or lack thereof. And they take ownership of their business within the business. And while it is a great idea and practice to be leaning into your sales leaders for constructive feedback and, words on how to improve their game, what I've seen happen even in COVID times from 2020 is sales reps are talking to their customers. They're learning from their customers how their customers are navigating these waters so that they can keep a catalog mentally of the most common problems or critical business issues that are surfacing during these really rough times. And they're doing their best to frame up solutions to those problems. And it's also helping them with their talk track for prospective customers who are trying to make their way through these challenging times as well. The best salespeople are spotting the patterns, and they're able to address critical business issues that new prospects are raising in conversations. I mean, it runs the gamut in terms of taking ownership, taking initiative, being proactive, working with internal resources like a sales leader, but also external in terms of your customers and prospects.
So you mentioned there's a couple of things here that tie together, and I honestly don't know your thoughts or where we'll go with this. But You mentioned the business within the business. You mentioned internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and we've all heard this cliche. Every sales manager has told the salespeople that you should treat if you've got a territory, you should treat your territory as an entrepreneur. You're trying to grow it, you're trying to develop it, or if you've got a list of customers, you're trying to treat it as your own business that you own. Now, with all that said, again, in the age that we're living in, where you can generate leads on LinkedIn, you can create content. I think a lot of forward-thinking organizations want salespeople to become, to a certain extent, thought leaders or experts in their space, and they can leverage that as well as the individual to generate leads and generate conversations. With all that, Ralph, is it more true than ever before that salespeople should actively be treating their territories or their customers like an entrepreneur? And could you get to the point where you have so much content, you're generating inbound leads, your potential buyers want to speak to you because you have the expertise? Do you think it's possible to get to a point where you become unsackable because you are, as an individual, just such a resource to the marketplace that your organization that you work for serves?
Absolutely, Will. You become indispensable, as you know, or unsackable through your great work. And while it's really important to be consistent with delivering those outcomes and results you and I talked about earlier, the real outcomes and results that you need to be delivering are in your marketplace, to your customers, to your prospects, to your partners. And when you oversee a territory, for example, or a market segment, or even a product line, and you take that business owner approach to your territory and really run your business within the business, being responsible for the profits and losses going on in your patch, so to speak, you become that trusted advisor and that person that your prospects, customers, and partners actually tether themselves to. They need your insights. They need your observations. They need your guidance in order for them to move the needle from X to Y in a given time frame. And when you are doing that externally, you're indispensable internally so much earlier that your company just can't live without you when you're serving the marketplace as well as you are, keeping all those things in mind and actually practicing against them.
Sure. Okay, so there's going to be some salespeople who have no problems with this next question, Ralph, and they're going to blow their own trumpet and they're going to be able to communicate this effectively, and they won't let anyone else get any sleep until they know how much value they're delivering to their customers. That's going to be a sub-segment of the audience listening to this, right? But there's also going to be another chunk, perhaps who are more analytical, perhaps they're slightly more introverted, however we want to frame up their personality or even the role that they're in. For example, me selling some medical devices, it's quite difficult to get a testimonial from a surgeon because they're just so wrapped up in litigation and they're nervous about litigation that they don't want to recommend you as an individual for numerous cases. So it's difficult to get that versus, if you're selling accounting software, you probably get someone, an accountant, a buyer to give you a quick testimonial. So with that said, if we'll make this real. Say that we're going into an annual review. Our company is doing okay. But we're got a sneaking suspicion, Ralph, that there's going to be a couple of redundancies. There's going to be a couple of people moving, shaking, whatever it is, whether it's good or positive. There's going to be some change. What do we need to take to our sales managers, our sales leaders? What objectively can we show them that makes us, that's documented us as being unsackable?
That's a big question. So I'm going to try to break it up into pieces. Well, first of all, if you're an individual contributor listening to today's episode and conversation, and you're having trouble, let's say you are in the medical device industry, and you're having trouble getting those testimonials or use cases from surgeons or the physicians that you're working with, the next best step, I suggest, is really leaning on accurate and current industry trends as well as executive priorities. What are the priorities of surgeons or medical professionals today that you can leverage in conversations with prospects and customers in lieu of, a said testimonial? There, as you mentioned, there's so many different resources online that you can go to kind of gather insights and data to then share with your marketplace. So that's one suggestion I would make. The second piece is about When we come into a world where we do think some peers of ours are going to be made redundant and we have to differentiate ourselves on our team, you have to keep in mind that, businesses are making an investment in account executives and in sales professionals. And there are two concepts that I usually lean on when it comes to this topic. The first is you must become a contributor of value sooner than later. You can only stay a consumer of value for so long. And once you hit that tipping point and become that contributor of value, you've hit what we've called the break-even point. And author Mike Watkins talks about this in depth in a book that he wrote about a decade ago now. It's called The First 90 Days, where he talks about, this company makes an investment in you and you're onboarding and you're learning the ropes, you're understanding the company's history, the marketplace that you're going to tend to, et cetera, and you're consuming value. But the second you close that first deal or make that first referral or do business with that first partner in developing a channel, you've hit that break-even point and you're now a contributor of value. And it also reminds me of a concept called the sales learning curve. This was published in the Harvard Business Review, 2004, maybe 2005, from a gentleman named Mark Leslie. And Mark, I had an opportunity to hear speak about the sales learning curve at a luncheon several years ago, hosted by Sequoia Capital. At the time, they were one of the investors in a company that I represented. So had the privilege of going to this luncheon and listening to Mark talk about the sales learning curve, essentially saying the same thing, that, a company needs to see return on the headcount that they're investing in the go-to-market organization sooner than later, and need to see that return consistently over time. So if you parachute in to a new organization, or even if you want to call today day one in an organization that you've been part of for some time, remind yourself of these concepts. How soon did I hit the break-even point? And how consistent am I in being a contributor of value? And number two, have I really illustrated the sales learning curve to the best of my ability? And when you're mindful of that and actually practicing towards it, you will become indispensable and unsackable without question.
Going a step further with this, Ralph, if we think of there's inputs and outputs of a salesperson, we're going to just massively objectify myself and the audience here for a second. Mm-hmm. On year one, if we're expecting X return, is year two linear from year one, as in, is it X return plus a little bit, and then year three is X return plus a little bit more? Or should this be more logarithmic, as in, should it shoot up, as in, the salesperson in year 5 or 10 should be delivering way, way, way more value than they were in year 2 or year 3? So what I'm getting at is, do we just need to increase our value gradually over time, and or does our value need to compound over the time that we're in the organization?
It depends, Will, and I've seen both in practice. I lean towards the former, where 3 to 5 years out, there's just gobs of value coming from this individual contributor. Now, there's an assumption made, though, if we're going to go that path, and it is that more and more responsibility might be granted to that individual over time. There's obviously going to be a lift in compensation as well for that individual. There may be a promotion in there for that individual. There's a lot of different variables that we can consider, but ideally, and in my experience, I think that 3 to 5 year plan is the way to go. And when you take a look at that 3 to 5 year plan, it kind of begins to answer path 2, which is your value and the return that you provide the company could be compounding over that 3 to 5 year term or more. A lot of sales reps. I'd be curious to know, you may know this, Will, what the average tenure is, for example, in the SaaS industry, or even in the medical hardware industry, what the average tenure is of an individual contributor. I think in SaaS, it's about 2.5 years. So oftentimes you don't even get to that 3 to 5 year mark. They're in and then they're out and off to another greener pasture. But again, as I said at the start of our conversation, in my experience, some of the best sales leaders that I've worked for have been able to retain those account executives for far past 5 years.
So I'm going to totally butcher the source of the data, so I won't include the source. We can Google it after the fact and put it in the show notes. It was just over 2 years in SaaS, selling technology products, but I think that's slightly skewed in that a lot of SaaS roles, you might start off as an SDR, and then there's a natural progression versus in my medical device days, you were just a device rep, and then you were a senior device rep doing the same job, just on more money with rather than a 3 Series BMW, you get a 5 Series BMW. So maybe there was more incentive to, or you're in the same company in SaaS or tech sales, but you've got different job roles, so that might skew some of the data there. And that's exactly what I was going to ask. Is it a competitive advantage then, Ralph, in a culture where people are seemingly changing jobs every 1, 2, 3 years? Is it an advantage in an environment like we're in right now, where people may be getting redundant, to have been at an organization for that bit longer? Does that put you in an advantage if there are redundancies being made?
I think so. Are you speaking in terms of you're an individual contributor that's been made redundant, but you've been in the organization for quite some time, or you've not been made redundant and you've got that on your track record that you've been part of the organization for quite some time?
From the context of it's national, or it's the national sales manager's on the territory, and he's going around doing a yearly review of everyone, and we know someone's going to get sacked for whatever reason, good or bad. If we know, and we're in the middle of the pack, say maybe we're doing the middle of the pack numbers wise. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do feel like if you've been there that little bit longer, you just got that little bit of extra experience. Maybe there's cognitive bias here of the company's invested more into you at this point, and so they don't want to let you go. Maybe there's biases involved in this as well, but I feel like someone who's been there 4 or 5 years is seemingly, on paper at least, going to be a better investment than someone who's only been there 2 or 3.
I'd agree, Will, again, with the assumption that this person's been consistently delivering throughout their tenure there. They're the ones who we would, in this case, see as indispensable, at least in the present moment, enough to not make them redundant. And it might be a nice segue into another trait of some of the A players who are in that situation. It's not only are they delivering results consistently, taking ownership and being proactive, running their business within the business, but they're also serving others, not just externally in the marketplace, but internally. They're helping a lot of the up and comers who are currently sales development reps. They might be helping some lower performing account executives. They might be doing some ancillary work for maybe the marketing team or even the customer success organization. And again, they're seen as that trusted advisor we talked about internally. Their peers and colleagues know that they can lean on Will if, there's a mentorship opportunity, for example, or you might be struggling in your territory and, sowing the seeds in establishing new relationships. And Will has been seen as an expert at that in multiple territories, for example. So Ralph, why don't you talk to Will, and Will, would find that amenable and get on the phone, no problem, to kind of figuratively put his arm around you and help you out. That's another great trait I've seen over and over and over again is, these high performing account executives will actually pause to help out their buddies. For
sure. That's perfect. Okay. So with that said then, Ralph, let's get real practical here. Let's say someone in the audience does have this annual review coming up, and they get a little bit sketched out over the fact that their job might be not secure, even though they've been hitting target. How do they document the fact that they've been mentoring other people? How do they document that they are, you've used this word a number of times, that they have accountability and that they have ownership? How do we build, even if it's a little bit of a document that we can slide across the table to our sales manager, versus just, otherwise it's kind of, well, he said this and she said that and I helped this person. How do we, or what would you like to see in some kind of documentation of this?
Sure. Well, first of all, go with God, but back it up with data.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to your point, Will, you might want to start, if you're not yet, you might want to start keeping a log or a journal, whether it be in Google Docs or Evernote or even on a piece of paper that you hold digitally somehow, to literally do that. Maybe pull out the piece of paper like this and slide it across the table when you're at a pivot point where you've got to prove yourself, or perhaps that happens in a QBR and it's the final slide, and you start to share what you've chronicled over your time with the company. That's kind of outside of your base remit, that you're responsible for. And when you're keeping a log of not just the successes in terms of deals that you've helped close, but the failures as well, and what you've learned from those failures, and how you've illustrated resilience and kind of dusting yourself off and coming back, I think that goes a really long way. And if you also include on that list, several mentees that are up and comers in the company, that too goes a long way. Oh, I didn't know that you were doing that. I didn't know you'd been mentoring Will for the last 2 quarters. We've seen a lot of uptick from Will's performance, over the last 6 months, and wow, that's great. Didn't know that you were mentoring him or her. I think that's huge. It's the unspeakable stuff that really counts more often than not.
And I think a layer of unspeakable, especially if you're, I hate the term, and we won't dive into it, it's another conversation for another time, but social selling. If you're producing or sharing content on social, something I've started doing this year is, if I get a nice comment of, oh, that was really helpful, Will, or I need to look further into this, or anything like that, anything positive, I've been taking a screenshot of it, and just on my desktop, on the office computer, I just throw it in a folder. And it started off just 2 or 3 kind of mediocre, like you've added a little bit of value here, and then it, 5, 6, okay, well, there's still no one's calling me the next coming of Jesus or anything like that. No one's kind of there's no parades of the content I'm posting. But now the folder literally has thousands. I think it's over 1,000 screenshots in there. So then you go for, and clearly I'm producing more content than probably any of the audiences. But that might be 50, it might be 100. And just that on a slide at the end of a quarterly business review or an annual sales review, whatever it is, just that shows that you're adding more than what the numbers show, and that you're adding that value to a community of people that are buying from you, that it's almost intangible. And it's the only way I can figure out to track it and add an objective layer to it is to take a screenshot of a comment or an email or anything like that. But I feel like that has tremendous value. And I know for me, when I now look at this folder, that there's too many screenshots and images to actually run through. I'll probably need to get one of the team to go through at some point and throw away anything that's too just me getting my ego scratched and not actually the person appreciating the value. Then that's a resource in its own. So if you are doing social selling, if you are, even just if you're giving value over email, there's probably loads of opportunities to grab things like that, right?
Oh, absolutely. So, you become a brand ambassador, Will, not just of yourself, but of the company that you represent, and even our profession at large. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Jim Rohn, which is, the more value you add to the marketplace, the more valuable you become in the process. And just taking you, for example, you and I last met on your show, like I said, it was probably 4 years ago now. And if I just visit your YouTube page alone and start going through the catalog of videos that you've produced and the different discussions you've had with the different people in our profession, it's astounding in such a good way. So you, my friend, have a very good problem in that you now need to index and categorize all that work that you've done and all those screenshots and all those names that you've been able to have great conversations with. And therein lies the increase in your value. And I think, a lot of salespeople who are dabbling in social selling or want to be a little more active in social media need to understand that it's not always about touting your company, touting the company's history, touting the latest iteration of your product line. While it's fine to mention that, set an example of, like you said, really helping out people who are maybe in your role or people who are aspiring to become the role that you are today. And get strategic, but also get tactical in the content that you are sharing. If an article, for example, or even a podcast episode appeals to you enough to want to share it with your network, give us some tidbits as to what appealed to you. At minute 22, when Will mentioned this, it reminded me of this, and you need to keep in mind, boom, 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 and now take action on it in your own world. That just goes much further than just, sharing the episode or sharing the article or sharing news and information about your company. Keep it about all of us out here, and you'll do just fine and start to notice that trajectory lift up.
That no one's ever said that. That is absolutely brilliant, Ralph. Because the inevitably, right, when I first started the show, I had to explain to a lot of people what a podcast was. But there's inevitably now a podcast for every industry, every niche. If there isn't, you should probably create it for your own niche, right? If you're in a space that doesn't have that voice, you can become the voice very easily. But all you have to do, as you said, get the podcast, listen to it, break it down, and then you become an advocate for someone else's content, and then they're going to promote you. I've just had an interview with a young lad who he's just commented on everything I've done for the past 12 months. He's come from nowhere, and now he was on the show. And I've had people who've written 5-6 books who I won't have on because I don't see the value that that they can provide in real time for the audience right now as we are in 2020. So just doing that alone is a content strategy for salespeople, just to be the beacon of news and insights for people who are too busy to consume all the content and all that podcast content on their own.
Well, Will, that you don't even need to tell me. That must have been very flattering to speak with that individual and just learn how much they learned from you and your content. And it's a great reminder to all of us that, whether you like it or not, you're always setting an example. Always setting an example. People, most times won't ever tell you the example that you're setting. So, hold yourself to high standards and, deliver what you think is valuable to others so that they can take it and learn from it, whether or not they actually respond to you or share their feedback or even thank you. It shouldn't matter. Just, rest easy knowing that you're putting a lot of goodness into the world by way of your content and the way that you're sharing it. And, if more people do that, we're going to have a pretty good next couple years. You know what I mean?
For sure. Okay, we'll wrap up with this. We've covered all the positive stuff. Let's touch on, we'll do rapid fire, Ralph, the negative things. What makes you, other than missing your target, what makes you completely dispensable as a salesperson?
Oh, boy. Wow. Yeah, I love this. That could be a really good answer for people who are wondering, how do I become indispensable? Simple, just invert, what you think a crummy salesperson would need to do to be dispensable, and you've got the formula. So things that come to my mind include be a poor communicator. Don't communicate often, don't communicate consistently, don't communicate clearly or cogently for that matter, and things will not bode well for you. Second is don't show up, don't be accountable, don't take ownership, don't put some skin in the game and really approach your craft with passion. Don't wave the flag or rally around the mission of the company or the mission of the team within the company. Instead, go your own way. There are a lot of great sales reps out there that the challenger sale methodology would call lone wolves. Solution selling would call them eagles. They're the ones that, even though they may be keeping a lot close to the vest in terms of their day-to-day practice, they are present. They are there for their teammates, etc. They're not atop the mountain, kind of doing things their own way. If they were, that it doesn't matter how consistent you are with the results. If you are a diva and the world kind of orbits around you, and you're not there for others, and you're not serving internally and externally, that's a great way to be dispensable as well. I mean, we can go forever on this. There's so many obvious traits, I think.
Sure. Okay. Well, and a couple for me, and we'll wrap up with this. One, this is something I used to do, maybe not a lot, but I've caught myself doing it in the past, and it's something I had to train myself out of. Don't tell white lies. If you've done something wrong, suck it up, especially if it's internal. If it's a customer, I feel like it's easier to let go and say, oh, sorry, I screwed up. I used to when I first got into sales, kind of like 10, 12 years ago, I'd make a mistake and I'd try and cover it up internally because I didn't want to look stupid in front of my sales manager because I cared what they thought of me. Nowadays, I care less what people think of me, and my ego is such that I'm happy to say I've messed up. But as I said, I used to tell white lies that used to then cause more white lies and then more trouble, and then you eventually get found out because you're going to. So no white lies. And then something you kind of touched on there, but I'll dumb it down for anyone who is like me who's listening, Ralph, and that is don't be a pain. Don't be awkward. If you are that lone wolf, over communicate, because again, this is something that I used to fail on. I would be head down, I'd be getting the deals done, I'd be again pushing for these huge deals once or twice a year, but I would not communicate. I thought I was communicating, but I wasn't communicating that I was working, and I had sales managers who thought I was just off skiving, which then got my back up because I'm working really hard, but it was because my perception of appropriate communication wasn't high enough, and so I had to force myself to over communicate what I was doing, and then everyone was happy because they could see the transparency there, and they could see that the job was actually getting done.
That's right. Yeah, you have to leave behind that trail of breadcrumbs for people to kind of see and know and believe in what you're doing. And I could not agree with you more and emphasize more the importance of high integrity and high standards. That's a big one in my book. And I would also add this, Will, just overall attitude and disposition. The way you show up, the tone you use when you're speaking with people. And that goes for even in your writing. There's a tone that people are going to notice, and they'll vibe off of you. And you want to lead by example, no question.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that most of this show could be summed up as in hit your target, communicate, and don't be an idiot. Is that fair to say?
A simple formula, but it works. And all of a sudden, you're unsackable.
Unsackable. Love it. Well, Ralph, tell us a little bit about Trade.io, and then tell us where we can find out more about you as well, sir.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. So really easy to follow Trade.io. That is the URL that you would type in to take a look at us. But essentially, we're helping a lot of businesses with the problem of integrating and automating all the components of their tech stack and driving automated workflows across their enterprise. So I've been at Trey for a little over a year now, overseeing their inside sales organization. Right now, we have offices in the UK and in the United States, namely in San Francisco, and I'm just having a blast. It's comprised of a lot of really sharp, good people, and that's who you want to surround yourself with. If you want to follow me, it's very simple on LinkedIn. It's Ralph Barsi. Twitter is @rbarsi, and you can also check out my blog. Specifically the projects I've done in the past, again, talking about leaving behind this trail of breadcrumbs of value for the marketplace. It's ralphbarsi.com/show your work, and it's show-your-work. But yeah, that's how you can find me, Will. Pretty easy.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Ralph, I want to thank you for your time, your expertise, and I make this promise to you and the audience now that we'll get you back on in less than 4 years next time round, mate. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Will.